The Whispering Woods. In the heart of a remote national park, where the trees stretched high into the sky and the fog clung to the earth like a shroud, there lay a forest known by locals as the Whispering Woods. It was a place wrapped in stories. Stories of voices that called out from the mist, leading the unwary off the beaten path. Emily, a young and curious park ranger, had always been fascinated by these tales. Her days were spent patrolling the winding trails and her nights poring over old maps and legends. It was during one such night that she met David, a local historian with a keen interest in the Eerie forest. Together, they decided to uncover the truth behind the whispers. As they ventured deeper into the fog-covered woods, a silence enveloped them, a silence so heavy it felt like a living thing. The air was cold, sending shivers down Emily's spine. She clutched her flashlight tightly, the beam of light cutting through the mist like a sword. The further they walked, the more Emily felt a sense of unease. It was as if the forest itself was watching them, its ancient trees whispering secrets in a language long forgotten. David, with his eyes scanning the underbrush, suddenly halted. There, half covered by overgrown vines, were the ruins of what looked like an old stone building. "This must be the old monastery," David whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. Legend says it was abandoned centuries ago after a mysterious figure, known only as the Whisperer, cursed the land. As they explored the ruins, a chill ran through the air, and the forest fell silent. Then, as sudden as a gust of wind, whispers filled the air. They were soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, but grew louder, more insistent. Emily's heart raced as she tried to discern the words, but they were in a language she didn't understand. "Did you hear that?" David asked, his face pale. Before Emily could answer, the temperature dropped drastically. A figure emerged from the fog, a shadowy silhouette that seemed to float above the ground. It was the Whisperer, just as the legends described. "Leave this place." The Whisperer's voice was like the wind, cold and unfeeling. "The curse remains." David, driven by a historian's curiosity, stepped forward. "Who are you? What happened here?" The Whisperer's form flickered like a candle flame. "I was once like you, curious and bold. But my meddling unleashed something ancient, something evil. I am bound to these woods, a guardian and a warning." Emily, feeling a mix of fear and awe, asked, "What's the curse?" "A darkness lies beneath these grounds, trapped for now. But if the monastery is ever disturbed, it will awaken." The Whisperer's voice grew fainter. "Beware the whispers, for they seek to free what must remain chained." As quickly as it appeared, the Whisperer vanished, leaving Emily and David alone in the chilling silence. The air gradually warmed, and the forest sounds returned, but the encounter left them shaken. "We must seal the ruins," David said, a sense of urgency in his voice. "We can't risk whatever is buried here being released." Working quickly, they gathered stones and branches, covering the old monastery's entrance. As they worked, the whispers returned, louder and more desperate, but Emily and David ignored them, focusing on their task. Finally, as the last stone was placed, the whispers stopped. The forest seemed to sigh, a sound of relief carried by the wind. Exhausted but satisfied, Emily and David made their way back through the woods. The fog seemed to lift, and the sun broke through the canopy, casting dappled light on the forest floor. "We did it," Emily said, a smile breaking through her tiredness. "Yes, but we must never forget," David replied, his eyes reflecting the depth of their experience. "The Whispering Woods hold secrets that are not meant for us to know." As they left the forest behind, the ancient trees stood silent, guardians of the hidden darkness below. The legend of the Whispering Woods would live on, a tale of curiosity and the echoes of a past best left undisturbed. And deep within the woods, where the fog still clung to the earth, the whispers fell silent, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close. Lost time. In a remote corner of a sprawling national park, there lay a trail shrouded in mystery and tales of the unexplainable. Known to the locals as the Timeless Trail, it was said that those who walked its path experienced bizarre losses of time and surreal phenomena. Sarah, a pragmatic scientist with a skeptical mind, had always dismissed these stories as mere superstitions. That was until she met Jack, a man who claimed to have survived a harrowing ordeal on the very same trail. Together, they set out to debunk the myths surrounding the Timeless Trail. Armed with scientific equipment and a determination to uncover the truth, they began their journey on a clear, sunny afternoon. As they hiked, the forest around them seemed to close in, the light filtering through the leaves casting strange shadows on the ground. Sarah checked her watch regularly, noting the time meticulously in her notebook. But as they ventured further, a sense of unease began to creep over her. The air felt heavier, and the path, which seemed so clear at the start, now twisted and turned in confusing ways. Jack, walking a few steps ahead, suddenly stopped and looked around. "This is odd," he said, his voice laced with uncertainty. "I don't remember this part of the trail." Sarah consulted her map, but it was no help. The path they were on didn't seem to exist on paper. She looked at her watch again and frowned. Hours had passed in what felt like minutes. The sun, which should have been high in the sky, was now setting, casting an orange glow through the trees. "That's impossible," she muttered, feeling a ripple of fear. She turned to Jack, but he was no longer there. In a panic, she called out his name, but only silence answered. Wandering alone, Sarah felt the forest around her begin to change. The trees seemed to bend and twist, their branches reaching out like hands. She saw figures in the corner of her eye, but when she turned to look, there was nothing there. Her scientific mind struggled to make sense of it all. Then she stumbled upon a clearing. In the center lay a series of ancient stones, arranged in a pattern that looked deliberate. As she approached, the air around her vibrated with an energy she couldn't explain. The stones seemed to hum, a sound that resonated in her bones. In the fading light, she saw Jack. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, staring at the stones with a look of horror. "I remember now," he whispered. "This is where I lost time, where I saw things." Sarah tried to approach him, but it was as if an invisible force held her back. The air around the stones shimmered, and for a moment she saw images flashing within it, scenes of the past and future blending together in a disorienting dance. "The trail, it's alive," Jack murmured. "It feeds on time, on reality itself." Sarah's mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, but there was none. This was beyond science, beyond anything she had ever encountered. As night fell, the forest plunged into darkness. The only light came from the stones, which now glowed with an eerie luminescence. Sarah and Jack, bound by an unseen force, watched as the air around the stones rippled and twisted. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them trembled. The stones' glow intensified, casting bizarre shadows across the clearing. Sarah felt a surge of energy, a pull that seemed to come from the very heart of the trail. "This is where it happens," Jack said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the stones. "The moment of lost time." Sarah reached out, her hand hovering over the glowing stones. She could feel the power emanating from them, a force that defied the laws of nature. With a final look at Jack, she touched the stones. The world around her exploded in light and sound, a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes that overwhelmed her senses. She felt herself falling, tumbling through time and space. When she opened her eyes, she was back at the beginning of the trail. The sun was high in the sky, as if the day had just begun. She looked around, disoriented and confused. Jack was there, looking just as bewildered. We went back," he stammered. "Back in time." Sarah checked her watch. It showed the exact time they had started their hike. Everything they had experienced, the lost hours, the surreal events, had been erased. As they walked back in silence, Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The timeless trail had revealed its secret, a secret that challenged everything she knew about the world. It was a place where time bent and reality shifted, a place of unexplainable mysteries. They emerged from the trail just as the sun began to set, the experience forever etched. The Forgotten Camp. In a secluded corner of a sprawling national park, hidden by dense woods and forgotten by time, lay the remnants of an old campsite. It was a place that local legend said was haunted, a site of a tragedy long past but not forgotten. This was where a group of daring teenagers decided to spend their night, spurred on by tales of ghostly apparitions and a dare to brave the unknown. The teens, full of laughter and bravado, set up their tents as the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the abandoned site. They gathered around a flickering campfire, the light dancing across their faces, unaware of the eyes that watched them from the darkness of the woods. As night fell, the forest grew still, the only sound the crackling of the fire and their hushed voices sharing ghost stories. But as the hours passed, the mood shifted. The air grew colder, and a mist began to rise from the ground, swirling around the campsite. One of the teens, Alex, decided to explore the nearby woods. He wandered through the trees, his flashlight beam cutting through the fog. That's when he stumbled upon an old backpack, half buried under fallen leaves. Its contents were scattered around, a rusted flashlight, a water bottle, and a diary, its pages yellowed with age. As Alex flipped through the diary, a sense of unease washed over him. The entries spoke of strange occurrences at the campsite, of shadows that moved in whispers in the night. The final entry was frantic, a plea for help that was never answered. Rushing back to the campsite, Alex showed his friends the diary. Their laughter faded as they read the ominous words. They realized they were not alone in these woods. The campsite, it seemed, was alive with the memories of those who had come before them. Suddenly, the fire flickered wildly, casting ghostly shadows across the camp. The teens huddled together, eyes wide with fear, as spectral figures emerged from the mist, their forms transparent and shimmering in the firelight. One of the apparitions, a young girl, stepped forward. Her eyes were hollow, her expression one of sorrow and pain. She pointed to a spot just beyond the campsite, a silent invitation to follow. The teens, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, followed the ghostly figure. She led them to a clearing where the remains of an old cabin stood, its walls crumbling and overgrown with ivy. There, they were met by an old park ranger, his face etched with years of worry and regret. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This place, it's cursed." He told them the story of a tragedy that had occurred decades ago, of a group of campers much like themselves who had vanished without a trace. He had been a young ranger then, and their disappearance had haunted him ever since. As he spoke, the ghostly figures gathered around, their faces etched with sorrow. "They were my friends," the ranger continued, tears in his eyes. "I was supposed to protect them, but I failed." The teens listened, their hearts heavy with the weight of his words. They realized that the ghostly figures were the spirits of the missing campers, trapped in this place, unable to move on. The ghostly girl who had led them to the clearing stepped forward. In her hand, she held a locket, which she gave to the old ranger. "It's time to let go," she whispered, her voice like the wind. With trembling hands, the ranger opened the locket. Inside was a picture of the girl, smiling and full of life. Tears streamed down his face as the realization hit him. He had to forgive himself to set their spirits free. He looked up at the ghostly figures, his voice firm. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." As he spoke, a light began to shine from the locket, enveloping the spirits in a warm glow. One by one, they faded away, their faces peaceful at last. The teens watched in awe as the spirits disappeared, the weight of their presence lifting from the campsite. The old ranger, now at peace, walked away into the night, his burden finally lifted. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, the teens packed up their camp, forever changed by the night's events. They left the campsite behind, but the memories of the forgotten camp and its ghostly inhabitants would stay with them forever. In the forest, the mist cleared, and the sun shone down on the old campsite, now just a memory of a past long gone but never forgotten. The shadow in the trees. Alex, a passionate wildlife photographer, always sought the unexplored corners of the world for his next great shot. His latest adventure brought him to a secluded area of a vast national park, known for its dense forest where shadows seemed to linger even in broad daylight. As Alex ventured deeper into the woods, the trees grew so close together that they blotted out most of the sun. He felt an eerie stillness in the air, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Despite this, he pressed on, camera in hand, eager to capture the hidden beauty of this untamed place. It was while he was focusing his lens on a particularly gnarled tree that he first noticed it, a vague, shadowy figure in the background of his photograph. At first, Alex thought it was just a trick of the light, but when the figure appeared in more of his photos, always watching, always at the edge of the frame, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and unease, Alex began to search for the figure. Each day, he ventured into the forest, following the elusive shadows and the faint traces of footsteps that seemed to lead nowhere. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows between the trees, Alex finally saw it with his own eyes. A shadowy entity, humanoid in form but blurry and indistinct, like a smudge on reality. It stood perfectly still, watching him from a distance. When Alex tried to approach, it melted away into the forest, leaving no trace. That night, back at his camp, Alex reviewed his photographs. The figure appeared in every single one, always in the background, its presence more menacing than ever. The images were distorted, the colors unnatural, as if the mere presence of the figure corrupted the reality captured in them. Alex's fascination turned into an obsession. He spent every waking moment in the forest, trying to capture a clear image of the figure to prove to himself he wasn't going mad. But the more he searched, the more he felt a creeping sense of dread, as if he was becoming a part of the forest's dark tapestry. One day, while tracking the figure, Alex stumbled upon a lost hiker, disoriented and terrified. The hiker spoke of being chased by something he couldn't see, of losing time and wandering in circles. It was then that Alex realized the forest, with its dense trees and lingering shadows, was not just hiding the figure but was a part of it, a living entity with a will of its own. Determined to uncover the truth, Alex set out deeper into the woods than ever before. As the light faded and the forest grew dark, he felt the gaze of unseen eyes upon him. The trees seemed to whisper in a language he couldn't understand, and the air grew colder with each step. Then, in a clearing shrouded in mist, he saw it, the shadowy figure, clearer than ever, standing before an ancient tree. Its form was constantly shifting, like smoke caught in a gentle breeze. Alex raised his camera, his hands shaking, and took a photograph. In the blinding flash of the camera, the figure's true nature was revealed. It was not just a shadow, but a guardian of the forest, a manifestation of the woods itself. In that moment, Alex understood that he was not the observer but the intruder, a trespasser in a realm that was not meant for humans. The figure advanced toward him, and Alex felt a wave of terror like he had never known. He ran, the forest around him alive with movement and sound. Branches reached out like hands, trying to grasp him, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to shift and change. After what felt like hours, Alex emerged from the forest, his body exhausted, his mind reeling. The photographs he had taken were gone, destroyed by the forest's guardian. All that remained were his memories, fragmented and surreal. Back in the safety of his home, Alex tried to make sense of what he had experienced. He realized that some mysteries were not meant to be solved, that some shadows were best left undisturbed. The photographs he had taken before the encounter told a story of a man driven by curiosity, but the forest had its own story, one that was ancient and untamed. Alex knew he could never return to those woods, that the shadow in the trees would always haunt the edges of his dreams. And so, the forest remained, a place of mystery and fear, where shadows lingered and watched, and where the unknown reigned supreme. The echoing scream. In the heart of a sprawling national park, there lay a valley known for its remarkable echo. But recently, the echoes had changed, taking on a chilling quality. They no longer mimicked the playful shouts of hikers. Instead, they carried a haunting scream that reverberated off the valley walls. Rumors said that this scream was an omen, foretelling the disappearance of anyone who heard it. Laura, a skilled sound engineer with a fascination for unexplained phenomena, teamed up with Mark, a seasoned local guide, to investigate the source of this mysterious scream. They ventured into the valley equipped with sophisticated recording gear, determined to capture the eerie sound and uncover its origin. As they descended into the valley, a sense of unease settled over them. The usually vibrant sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by a suffocating silence. Laura set up her equipment, her hands steady despite the growing sense of dread. She pressed record, and the two waited. Night fell, and the valley was bathed in moonlight. That's when it happened. A blood-curdling scream, echoing through the valley, louder and more terrifying than any sound Laura had ever heard. Her equipment whirred, capturing the chilling sound wave. Mark, visibly shaken, insisted they leave, but Laura was captivated. She needed to find the source. Against Mark's better judgment, they followed the echo deeper into the valley. The scream seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a ghostly presence that surrounded them. As they ventured further, the air grew colder, and a dense fog enveloped them. Laura's equipment started to act strangely, the recordings becoming distorted, as if the scream was corrupting the technology. She heard whispers in the static, voices that seemed to beckon her deeper into the fog. Mark became increasingly anxious. "We need to turn back," he urged, but Laura was determined. She felt drawn to the sound, as if it was communicating with her. In the heart of the valley, they found an old, abandoned cabin, its windows shattered and its doors hanging off the hinges. The scream seemed to emanate from within. With a mix of fear and curiosity, they approached, the echo growing louder with each step. Suddenly, the cabin door slammed shut, and an oppressive silence fell over the valley. The scream had stopped, replaced by a deafening quiet. Laura and Mark, hearts racing, realized they were not alone. An unseen entity was with them, its presence felt but not seen. Laura's equipment burst to life, emitting a cacophony of distorted sounds. In the chaos, she heard a voice, a whisper hidden within the static. "Leave," it hissed, a warning that sent shivers down her spine. But Laura was entranced. She stepped closer to the cabin, her hand reaching for the door. Mark grabbed her arm, pulling her back just as the door burst open. A gust of wind rushed out, carrying with it the anguished screams of 1,000 voices. They ran, the valley echoing with their footsteps and the ghostly screams of the past. The fog seemed to chase them, twisting and turning, a maze with no escape. Laura's mind raced, trying to make sense of what they had heard. The voices in the static, the warning, the screams, they were all connected, a haunting melody of the valley's dark history. As they neared the edge of the valley, the screams faded and the fog lifted. They emerged into the safety of the dawn light, the valley behind them silent once again. Exhausted and shaken, Laura reviewed her recordings. The sounds were there, a haunting reminder of their night in the valley. But there was something else, a message hidden within the chaos. It spoke of a tragedy long forgotten, of a curse that bound the spirits to the valley. Laura knew she could never return to that place, that some mysteries were better left unsolved. The valley's secret remained hidden, its echoes a ghostly reminder of the unseen and unheard. And so, the valley remained, shrouded in mystery, its echoing scream a warning to those who dared to venture too close. For in the heart of the valley, the past lingered, its voice carried on the wind, a haunting melody that was both a lament and a warning. The Vanishing Trail. In a remote corner of an expansive national park, there was a trail known among the locals as the Vanishing Trail. It was said to appear and disappear without warning, leading those brave enough to follow it into a forgotten part of the woods, where time and reality seemed to bend and twist. A group of adventurous hikers, drawn by the mystery of the Vanishing Trail, set out to explore this enigmatic path. They were a mix of excitement and nerves, eager to discover if the stories were true. As they began their journey, the trail was clear and well-defined, winding through the lush forest. But as they ventured deeper, an eerie feeling settled over them. The forest grew denser, the air thicker, and a strange silence enveloped the surroundings. Suddenly, one of the hikers looked back and gasped. The trail they had been following was gone, swallowed up by the dense underbrush. They were stranded in a part of the park untouched by time, where the very landscape seemed to shift and change. With no choice but to press forward, the group continued, their sense of direction challenged by the ever-changing woods. The trees seemed to move, the paths rearranged themselves, and the sounds of bizarre wildlife echoed around them. As night fell, the hikers stumbled upon a small clearing where an old hermit lived. He was a mysterious figure, with eyes that held secrets and a voice that whispered like the wind through the trees. The hermit spoke of the woods with a mix of reverence and fear. He told them that this part of the forest was alive, that it had a will of its own. "The trail you seek," he said, his voice low and haunting, "is more than just a path through the woods. It's a gateway to a world that exists between the here and the now. Many have walked it, but few have returned." The hikers listened, their hearts pounding, as the hermit described the dangers that lurked in the shadows. He spoke of creatures that were not of this world, of illusions that could trap the unwary, and of a darkness that hungered for the lost. Frightened but determined, the group decided to find their way back at dawn. They spent a restless night in the clearing, the sounds of the strange and unknown wildlife keeping them awake. When morning came, they set out, guided by the hermit's cryptic advice. The forest seemed to watch them, its eyes hidden in the leaves and shadows. They saw things that defied explanation, glimpses of creatures that seemed to vanish as soon as they appeared, and trees that twisted into impossible shapes. As they walked, the forest began to change around them. Paths appeared and disappeared, leading them in circles. It was as if the woods were playing a game, luring them deeper into its heart. Then, without warning, the landscape shifted dramatically. The trees thinned out, and they found themselves on the edge of a vast, open field. In the center stood an ancient tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled fingers. The hermit had spoken of this tree, warning them to stay away. But as they approached, drawn by a force they couldn't resist, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The tree's branches twisted and turned, forming the shape of a doorway. One by one, the hikers stepped through the doorway, finding themselves back on the Vanishing Trail, just a few steps from where they had started. The forest around them was normal, the sounds of wildlife familiar and comforting. But they were changed. Their eyes held a distant look, their minds filled with the memories of a place that existed between the shadows and the light. They spoke little of what they had seen, each lost in their own thoughts. The Vanishing Trail remained a mystery, a path that led to a forgotten part of the woods where reality was a mere suggestion. And the hikers, now back in their world, knew that somewhere, deep in the heart of the park, the trail waited, ready to lure the next group of unwary travelers into its embrace. And the hermit, alone in his clearing, watched as the world shifted around him, a guardian of secrets too terrible to tell. For in the heart of the forest, the line between the real and the unreal was thin, and those who crossed it were forever changed. Beneath the moonlit canopy, Nora, a seasoned paranormal investigator with a fascination for the unexplained, had heard countless tales of a moonlit glade in the heart of the park, said to be haunted by ethereal spirits. Accompanied by Tom, her friend and a staunch skeptic, she set out to either prove or debunk the ghost stories that had long been associated with this mystical place. The glade was breathtaking under the night sky, the moonlight filtering through the trees, casting a silvery glow on the forest floor. Bioluminescent mushrooms dotted the ground, adding to the surreal beauty of the scene. Nora was mesmerized, her senses alive with anticipation, while Tom remained unconvinced, his mind firmly rooted in the world of the living. They set up their camp in the heart of the glade, surrounded by the whispering winds and the soft glow of the moon. Nora prepared for a seance, a ritual she had performed countless times, but never in a place as charged with supernatural energy as this. As they sat around a small table, hands touching, Nora began to recite the incantations that would summon the spirits of the glade. The air grew colder, and a dense mist began to rise from the ground, swirling around them in ghostly tendrils. At first, there was silence. Then, a faint whisper cut through the night, growing louder, turning into a chorus of voices that seemed to come from the very earth beneath them. Nora's eyes widened with excitement, while Tom's face turned pale with fear. The spirits of the glade had answered her call. Shadows began to form in the mist, shapes that were human and yet not human, moving with an otherworldly grace. They were the spectral entities of the glade, their faces serene and yet sorrowful. Nora reached out to them, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why do you linger here?" she asked. "What message do you have for the living?" One of the spirits, a woman with flowing hair and a gown that shimmered like starlight, stepped forward. Her voice was like the wind through the leaves, whispering a tale of tragedy and loss, of lives cut short and spirits bound to the glade, unable to move on. Tom, his skepticism faltering, listened in awe as the spirit spoke of a time long past, when the glade had been a place of joy and laughter before a terrible event had turned it into a realm of the dead. As the spirit spoke, the air around them shimmered with energy, and the bioluminescent mushrooms glowed brighter, illuminating the faces of the other spectral entities. They were a procession of the lost, each with their own story, their own unfulfilled desires. Nora, moved by the beauty and sadness of the scene, asked the spirits what they needed to find peace. The woman's voice grew faint, her form starting to fade. "Remember us," she whispered. "Tell our stories. Let us be more than just shadows beneath the moonlit canopy." As the spirits vanished, the glade returned to its serene state, the mist dissipating and the night growing warmer. Nora and Tom sat in silence, processing what they had witnessed. The night passed, and as the first light of dawn touched the glade, they packed up their camp, their minds heavy with the weight of the spirit's message. They left the glade with a new understanding, a new respect for the thin line between life and death. Nora knew that her work as a paranormal investigator had taken on a new meaning. She had to share the stories of the spirits to ensure they were not forgotten. Tom, no longer a skeptic, felt a deep connection to the natural world, a world that was more complex and mysterious than he had ever imagined. And the glade, with its haunting beauty and ethereal spirits, remained a place of mystery, a bridge between the living and the dead, forever bathed in the silvery light of the moon. For beneath the moonlit canopy, the spirits lingered, watching over the living, whispering their tales to those who dared to listen. The Cursed Lake. In the heart of a vast national park, hidden away from the well-trodden paths of hikers, there lay a lake whose still waters ran deep and dark. It was known by the locals as the Cursed Lake, a place shrouded in tales of sorrow and haunted by a malevolent water spirit. Many who ventured into its depths had failed to surface, their disappearances adding to the lake's sinister reputation. Chris, an experienced diver with an adventurous spirit, was drawn to the mysteries of the Cursed Lake. He teamed up with Lily, an expert in local legends who knew the stories of the lake as well as the lines on her own palms. Together, they sought to uncover the truth that lay submerged beneath the lake's surface. As Chris prepared his diving gear, Lily recited the tale of the vengeful spirit that dwelled within the lake, a spirit wronged centuries ago, bound to the waters by an ancient curse. She warned Chris of the glyphs that marked the entrance to the underwater ruins, said to be the spirit's lair. The air was heavy with the threat of a storm as Chris plunged into the lake, the water enveloping him like a cold embrace. Below him, the ruins loomed out of the darkness, a labyrinth of crumbling stone and forgotten history. The glyphs Lily had spoken of glowed faintly on the archway that led into the heart of the ruins. A warning or a welcome, Chris could not tell. As he swam deeper, the water around him began to churn, and he felt an unseen force pulling him further down. He fought against it, his lungs burning for air, but the curse of the lake was strong. In the murky depths, a figure appeared before him, its form shifting and flowing like the water itself. It was the water spirit, its eyes filled with an ancient wrath. Chris knew he was facing the very essence of the lake's curse. With every passing second, the spirit drew him closer, and he could feel the weight of centuries bearing down upon him. He thought of Lily above, her words a haunting echo in his ears, and with a surge of determination, he reached for the diving knife at his belt. The storm broke the surface as Lily watched, helpless, the lake roiling as if in the throes of anger. She could only hope that Chris would emerge victorious from his battle with the spirit. Below, Chris fought with all his might, his knife slicing through the water as he struggled against the spirit's pull. The glyphs around him began to glow brighter, casting an eerie light on the battle. With a final, desperate effort, Chris drove the knife into the heart of the ruins, where the spirit was strongest. There was a moment of silence, and then a great roar as the water around him began to swirl in a furious vortex. The spirit's form wavered, its wrathful gaze turning to one of surprise and then fear as the curse that had held it bound began to unravel. Chris kicked his way to the surface, gasping for air as he broke through the stormy waves. He swam with all his remaining strength towards the shore, where Lily waited. As he emerged from the water, the lake calmed, the storm dissipating as quickly as it had come. The spirit was gone, its curse lifted by Chris's bravery. And the blade that now lay at the bottom of the lake. Chris and Lily stood at the water's edge, looking out over the lake that had claimed so many. It was finally at peace, its surface reflecting the clear sky above as if it had never harbored a vengeful spirit. The cursed lake would no longer be a place of fear and sorrow but a reminder of the battle between the courage of the living and the fury of the past. And as the legend of Chris's encounter with the water spirit spread, the lake became a sight of awe and wonder, its depths holding not just the ruins of a forgotten time, but the story of a curse broken and a spirit set free. The Forest of Faces. Deep within a sprawling, ancient forest, there lay a peculiar area known as the Forest of Faces. This unique part of the woods was named for the trees that bore uncanny, human-like faces on their trunks. These faces, with their ever-changing expressions, were a source of both fascination and unease. Helen, a botanist with a passion for exotic flora, had long been intrigued by the stories of this forest. Eager to study the phenomenon, she organized an expedition with a group of artists who were drawn by the allure of capturing the forest's eerie beauty. As they ventured into the heart of the forest, the atmosphere grew strange and whimsical. The trees seemed to watch them, their facial features shifting subtly when no one was directly looking. The artists, inspired by the surreal surroundings, began to sketch and paint, while Helen studied the trees, trying to understand the science behind their bizarre appearances. As the day turned to evening, the forest seemed to come alive in a more literal sense. The trees' faces began to move more noticeably, their mouths opening as if to speak. Helen and the artists listened, captivated, as a faint whispering filled the air. It was as if the trees were communicating, their voices a chorus of rustling leaves and creaking branches. Intrigued and a little unnerved, the group decided to delve deeper into the forest. The path ahead of them seemed to shift and change, never leading where they expected. It was as if the forest itself was guiding them, leading them to its heart. The deeper they went, the more animated the trees became, their faces contorted into expressions of sadness, anger, and even joy. Helen began to realize that these trees were sentient, their roots interconnected, forming a living network that was aware of their presence. Suddenly, the forest fell silent. The faces on the trees turned to watch them, their expressions solemn. a large tree at the center of a clearing. Its face, more detailed and expressive than the others, seemed to beckon them forward. As they approached, the tree's mouth opened wide, and a deep, resonant voice filled the air. "Why have you come here?" it asked, its tone commanding yet curious. Helen, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear, stepped forward. "We came to study and admire your beauty," she said. "We mean no harm." The tree's expression softened. "We are the guardians of this forest," it explained. "For centuries, we have lived in harmony, but now we face a threat. We need your help." The group listened in awe as the tree spoke of a darkness that was spreading through the forest, a blight that threatened to destroy their ancient home. The trees, for all their power, were rooted in place, unable to combat this menace. The artists, moved by the plight of the forest, agreed to help. They would use their art to bring attention to the forest's predicament, to rally the outside world to its aid. Helen, too, promised to do whatever she could, her mind already racing with ideas on how to study and combat the blight. As they made their way back through the forest, the trees whispered their thanks, their faces showing expressions of gratitude. The path, which had been so confusing before, now led them unerringly back to the forest's edge. Upon returning to civilization, Helen and the artists stayed true to their word. The artist's work, inspired by the sentient trees, was exhibited in galleries, drawing attention to the forest's plight. Helen's research led to a greater understanding of the blight and efforts to combat it. The Forest of Faces, once a place of eerie mystery, became a symbol of the interconnectedness of all living things and the importance of preserving the natural world. And deep in the heart of the forest, the trees watched and waited, their faces an ever-changing testament to the beauty and wonder of nature. The hollowed ground, deep within a sprawling national park, far removed from the beaten paths of tourists and hikers, there lay a secluded area known as the Hollowed Ground. This ancient, sacred site, untouched by the passage of time, was adorned with archaic symbols that whispered of a forgotten era. Maya, a young and ambitious archaeologist, had always been drawn to unraveling the mysteries of the past. When she heard tales of the Hollowed Ground, she knew she had to explore its secrets. With permission from the park authorities and a heart full of curiosity, she set out to uncover the history hidden within the sacred site. As Maya delved into the dense forest that shielded the Hollowed Ground, she felt as though she was stepping into another world. The air was thick with the scent of old earth, and the silence was only broken by her footsteps and the distant call of birds. The sight was more breathtaking than she had imagined. Ancient stone stood in silent vigil, covered in symbols that seemed to pulsate with an unseen energy. Maya set to work, carefully documenting each symbol, each weathered stone, her hands trembling with excitement. As she worked, she began to uncover artifacts, pottery shards, tools, and ornaments that hinted at the lives of those who had once worshipped in this sacred place. But with each discovery, the air around her grew colder, and the forest seemed to close in, as if resenting her intrusion. Night fell, and Maya decided to camp within the site, unwilling to leave her precious findings. As she settled in for the night, a faint chanting filled the air, echoing around her. It was ghostly and ethereal, a sound that seemed both ancient and sorrowful. Frightened but fascinated, Maya followed the chants. She found herself drawn to the heart of the Hollowed Ground, where a large stone altar stood. The air around the altar shimmered with a spectral light, and before it, ghostly figures appeared, their forms translucent and wavering. They were the spirits of the tribe that had once worshipped here, their faces etched with pain and anger. They seemed to be performing a ritual, their ghostly hands moving in patterns that mirrored the ancient symbols Maya had documented. As she watched, mesmerized, a protective spirit materialized before her. It was a formidable presence, its form towering and shrouded in a cloak of mist. Its eyes glowed with a fierce light, and it spoke in a voice that seemed to come from the very earth beneath her feet. "You have disturbed the sanctity of this place," it boomed. "These grounds are not for the living to tamper with." Maya, her heart racing with fear, tried to explain her intentions. "I meant no harm," she stammered. "I only wanted to understand the history of this place, to share it with the world." The spirit's gaze softened slightly. "Your heart may be pure, but the secrets of the Hollowed Ground are not to be unveiled. They are sacred, protected by the souls of those who once walked here." As the spirit spoke, the ghostly tribe gathered around Maya, their expressions mournful. They whispered of their lives, of the rituals they had performed, and of the sanctity they had upheld. Maya realized then the gravity of her actions. She had unwittingly disturbed a place that was not just an archaeological site but a realm of the sacred, a bridge between the living and the dead. With a heavy heart, she promised to protect the secrets of the hallowed ground, to leave the site undisturbed. The protective spirit nodded, and the ghostly figures began to fade, their chants a distant echo. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, Maya left the hallowed ground, taking nothing but her memories and a newfound respect for the sacredness of ancient sites. She knew that some mysteries were meant to remain hidden, their secrets preserved by the spirits of the past. The hallowed ground remained untouched, a mystical place where the boundary between the physical world and the spiritual realm was thin. And Maya, forever changed by her encounter, dedicated herself to preserving the sanctity of such places, honoring the ancient traditions that had been entrusted to her. In the heart of the national park, the hallowed ground continued to stand as a testament to the past, its secrets guarded by the protective spirit and the ghostly tribe that once worshipped beneath its canopy.